rendered. So we're not paying for empty space. We only pay for when we have people who are referred there. So first, I'd like to defer to or recognize Ms. Roll, if you would, Chair Henyu, to respond regarding the object code and the eligibility of the expenditures under the budget forms. And then maybe after that, if you could recognize Dr. Jim, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
For that response, and I'll defer the question to Ms. Kristen Lowe for response to Vice Chair Smith's question.
Thank you, Chair. This is Kristen. In answer to Vice Chair Smith's question about the subcontractual services line item, that is coming at a different line item. That's coming at a 6,500 line item. Personnel expenses are actually a 2000 series. So I think Delegate Smith may be blending the idea of that the contractual services has people working on it versus personnel. Personnel is a very specific cost that is captured in that 2000 series of line item, of object codes. And so this is within the parameters of the fund management plan approved by the Budget and Finance Committee in resolution BFD-43-20, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that response, Kristen. And then I'll defer to Dr. Jim for the rest of the response to Vice Chair Smith's question.
Yes, thank you, Honorable Chair Henyu, for that, and also Honorable Vice Chair Smith for your question regarding the PAE. PAE is a current contractor that we've had starting last year with the CARES Act dollars, and they have continued to provide services as the extension was approved. And with the CARES Act dollars that are reducing right now, we need to maintain and continue isolation and quarantine services so that people can still have an option to isolate or quarantine away from their family if they can't do that at home. We used to provide quarantine and isolation tent kits over last summer, but because of the weather, we have options for the hotels and the Chinle Center. We have worked with personnel. The cost to run an isolation and quarantine and ACS is actually a lot more than we expect because of the competition around just the full wraparound services and medical staffing competitive prices. And so we've been lucky to have these services during the pandemic to provide that to our Navajo people. In regards to, so there's already an existing contract, and right now I'm assessing, I have been assessing the longevity of those dollars, and they won't probably take us either even past March right now to continue to provide these services, at least some sites. We have reduced drastically our ACS is on warm status, but our isolation and quarantine hotels are really have been effective in the areas in Farmington and also in Tuba City. Today we have 6 patients in the alternate care site. Chinle isolation, there is 19, I think. I don't have the number. Farmington isolation is 19, sorry. Then Tuba City is 12. And so those are the numbers that we have. So we have about 25 beds across the facilities. And so you're looking at 75 individuals at any given time that would have to recover. And so going forward, as we have more access to vaccines and when the weather gets warm, we will likely we might be able to see a reduction in the utilizations of isolation hotels as well. So we have to just continue to anticipate. We don't know if there will be another surge. We certainly know there are more variants out there that we don't know enough about, and we still have to learn if these vaccines will be effective to the new variants. So there's a lot of unknown, but right now, to safely isolate individuals that can't do that at home, we need to continue to provide these options, and we are trying to make cost reductions and savings, but at least this $1.5 million will keep us at least one site open for another month or so with those kinds of dollars. So that's where we're working with the isolation and quarantine. And like I said, at any given time, we're looking at about 75 people right now, depending on how long they recover. And also, Chinle has been another site that we've been working with, just monitoring their intake process as well. So we don't know when this pandemic will end, but I'm just thankful that we do have some money to assist us. The $650,000 is also supporting the lease agreement that we have with the school district there, so that we can continue to operate our RSS site and also our operation out of the community center as well, and making sure we keep supplies. So our medical supplies do get shipped over there, either from FEMA or either from the state. So we do have that cost that we need to continue to maintain with the Chinle Unified School District. I hope I answered all your questions, Honorable Smith, but thank you very much.
Goshen Kianla for that response. Vice Chair Smith, are you good on the response?
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, I am. I have a few other questions I'd like to ask. I'll wait until other members get their chance.
Okay, committee members, any other questions or comments? Then I'll defer back to Vice Chair Smith.
Thank you, Chair Henio, and members of the Budget and Finance and sponsor and your agents. The question I have is Navajo Nation has $8,893,838.99. Is there a current listing? I know that we're still receiving donations, or do we cut the donations off and that's all we're going to work with is 8.8 million? That's one question I have. The other question is, should the dollars continue to flow in, and this COVID-19, like Dr. Jill Jim said, there's another strain that's coming in, and we're always hit hard. So is there going to be another account that's going to be put into the donation fund? Or are we just going to cap this one here and have a business unit number and then create another business unit number for those that are donating? Because I still hear a lot of folks saying Navajo Nation's hit the hardest, and it's really, really devastating our Navajo people. And even just to think of the second strain, what is entailed on that. However, if we do continue with that, would that be a different business unit number? Because this one has a new, and it hasn't been provided a business unit number. And the other question I have too is, how soon are we looking at getting this done? Because when we talk about business unit numbers, it takes forever. I mean forever to get a business unit number. Working with OMB, OOC, for an example, if we were working with CPMD and there was a project and trying to get something going, I need the business unit number. Baten. Konada later OMB, ishi. Not so. Ado kojaga. Edo consul so later OOC nana. Ado konaja. I don't date OOC. Antakale CPMD. Chepapa. Oh, what's it that? we need to get this expedited because I'm sure that those tents are not meant to be there for longevity, and the winds are coming up, and I'm sure that those tents will probably not withstand those winds. So those are my three concerns, Shananda. Thank you.
Vice Chair Smith, for those questions. Yeah, it looks like all of them are designed to be responded by the Office of the Controller. So this Robert Willie or Ms. Erlingkirk, if you could provide a response to questions that were posed by Vice Chair Smith.
Chairman Henyo, this is Delegate Crotty.
Okay, Shananda, Delegate Member Crotty.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I appreciate the sponsor and his agents with the initial. So this will be the first recommendation for the donations that were sent to Navajo Nation, and so I'm using that lens in terms of the origins of this money, and in reading, the press release from the Navajo Nation in thanking the donations, my concern is that when individuals donated, they thought, or the intent was that they were going to provide like a direct relief, like humanitarian efforts. And so I see that in this budget, but so what I'm going and having a conversation in my mind is why is there not either federal funding available for this type of care that's related to COVID? I'm not exactly sure why either like IHS is not providing this type of funding, because and so that's what I'm trying to wrap around right now. It appears that that there should be other pots of funding for this type of activity, and I've heard in the original legislation that CARES funding could have potentially been used, Navajo Nation CARES funding, but Navajo Nation OMB has also reported that there's been several federal CARES funding from IHS and others to support some of the response to COVID. And so with those dates also being extended, is there opportunity to cover costs? Because now if we look at this budget, only about $3.5 million, so less than half, will go to direct humanitarian aid. I could forward the email or this from an individual who did donate to this fund, and she indicated that she used part of her first initial federal stimulus dollars because she had seen the Navajo Nation people not have water, and so I think the intent was for a lot of these donations to provide that direct humanitarian effort, and so I wanted to expand that conversation and see if this budget is in the essence of why the donations were made, and because I think we have to be very careful here if we want any other additional support, and making sure that this funding is being used in the way that individuals gave their dollar, because this month I'm looking at my notes. So far, I've had to help a handful of constituents isolate in the hotel, and so I'm finding ways to get them into the hotel so that they could isolate, or as they're recovering, so that they could have a hot shower as they're dealing with their symptoms. And so I also think it's in the Northern Agency, I don't know how any of these subcontractors are going to assist and provide that type of service. So I would need those questions to be answered. Thank you, Chair.
Christina, thank you for those questions. I'll defer that to the sponsor and Dr. Jim. First question for regarding Vice Chair Smith. The Office of the Controller, are you still on the line?
Chair, this is Controller. We're still here.
Okay, if you could respond to Vice Chair Smith's questions, and then I'll defer the rest of Delegate Amber Crotties to our sponsor here.
Okay, Chair. United Kid. Let's see. The first one is the business units. Our office will set up the business unit as soon as this gets approved. So we can get that done ASAP. Once that's done also, OMB has to set up the budget, so that would be on OMB. I think the other part of the donations was, or the other question was the amounts of the donations. So in our memo, we gave out some numbers. Those numbers, because the donations, they're still ongoing. So every day we get checks, and then we also get donations via the NDOH, I believe under the HDOC. Online, there's a credit card donation site, and so every day we get donations from individuals who are using their credit cards. That's the one on my report. It talks about Heartland. That's our credit card. So there's daily transactions, and then also, as I mentioned, we get people donating on a daily basis. We get the mail here at our office. And then the other one was the GoFundMe site. So we gave out numbers, and as of the end of December, we had a total balance of $8,931,319.07. That's at the end of December. And so since then, we've had additional donations as well. So I just wanted to point that out. It's still ongoing. There's, on a daily basis, there's people that donate to either directly, they still mail us personal checks, or they'll wire us money, or they'll donate to our credit card website for the HCOC. There's a donation page. And then there is a GoFundMe as well. So those are the three sources of where people can donate. And then, as I mentioned, those numbers change on a daily basis. But we gave out the $8.9 million. That's as of the end of December. So I just want to clarify that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that response. But I think the other part of the question was, this legislation is only asking for $8.8 million. What happens to the rest? Is there another fund management account that needs to be set up, or how would this work? Is one of the questions that Vice Chair Smith asked.
So this amount, the 8.8, goes to what's available, and all we're saying is as of the end of December, there's 8.9 that went in. So if there's any other usage, then obviously those requests would have to come through according to the fund management plan. And then also, just to make sure, anything that came in after the 1st of this month, then those would have to be accepted as well.
I think the question was, what happens to the balance? Well, does it just sit there, or does what happens to the balance of that money?
The balance sits in our account. We have a separate bank account just for donations. So everything just sits in there. It's right now, like I said, it's the 8.9 plus whatever came in up to this day, up to date. It's gonna be more than 8.9. And so we're just talking about 8.8 for this. And so anything left over and anything else that comes in stays in that bank account. Does that help? Does that clarify?
Thank you. Vice Chair Smith, does that help you with your question?
Well, thank you, Shanada. That was right along the lines that I was inquiring about. So this business unit number will be used for the additional amount. That was the question. Or do we have to get another business unit number when there is another request that's coming through? That was the question.
Okay.
If I
I'd like to
answer.
Go ahead.
This should only have one business unit. So there won't be another business unit with another request. But this one will set up a budget of this amount based on this approval, once it gets approved.
Okay, thank you for that response. So, Vice Chair Smith, yes, if there's another request for the additional money left over, there'll be a different business unit set up again. Well, does that help you with your inquiry?
Yeah, Chair you. Yeah, John.
I appreciate that. Hello, Shanada. Vice Chair Slater, regarding questions posed by Delegate Amber Canales-Balacrati to yourself and your agent.
Thank you, Chair Shma, for the questions. I believe that Dr. Jim can respond regarding why federal resources aren't available to pay for the isolation and alternative care site wraparound services. And then I think that she can also express how far this funding can get us. They use a burn rate to calculate how much of the resources are being used over a certain period of time and how much can be used. And then I think the last item was about serving your citizens and our citizens in Northern Agency and what resources are available to them. I think their site's located in Farmington. And then in terms of humanitarian relief, these will deliver humanitarian relief supplies that were obtained with the CARES Act funding. And I think that we as legislators and as leaders have seen, the full picture from our individual constituents to talking with the feds to talking with the state. And we all recognize that a dollar can be used many different ways. And in this instance, in order to maximize its usage, we're delivering those humanitarian relief supplies via these dollars. So in my opinion, we're still delivering the same intent with this legislation that people desire. And I also think that a lot of folks who donate, want to defer to the nation in how we'll use it, as long as it's being used to combat COVID and address the conditions that we're experiencing right now. So that's my answer from my leadership perspective. But just the last thing I would say is maybe it would make sense to add an amendment to this legislation saying, to the extent feasible, the Navajo Nation government will seek reimbursement, particularly for the contracts for delivering the humanitarian supplies, as well as the PAE contract, since I think in your and my estimation, those should be funded through federal dollars. But in the absence of that, we have to step up and use the resources available to us. It's important to spend down those dollars that are specific to COVID and not dip into our UUFB right now. So I'll hand it off to Dr. Jim, and I think she can hand it off to Dr. Yellowbin if that's amenable to you, Chair.
Thank you, for that response. Dr. Jim?
Yes, thank you, Chair Henyo, and also Shama, Ms. Crotty, or Honorable Crotty. Thank you for that question. The Indian Health Service funding has its limitation. There are federal requirements when the dollars have come down, similarly to the CARES Act dollars, but the CARES Act dollars were more flexible in supporting some of these responses to the pandemic. With Indian Health Service dollars, they were strictly related to COVID testing. Two of the four modifications, and the third one, I think 3 of 5 will be related to COVID testing only, and one is specifically for CHRs and public health nurses. And those dollars were slated for their special duty pay. A lot of the dollars through 638 programs were not paid through the special duty pay, so they were we reverted back to the IHS funding for special duty pay, and also those dollars are related to contact tracing. I would like to, in the future, do a financial analysis of all the dollars that we've spent here or had an access to. And I think as the pandemic continues, there is some light somewhere at the end of the tunnel, but we're not there yet. And I think we really need to assess the access to dollars that we have, but the Department of Health does not have any current dollars related to any general fund dollars access to respond to the pandemic. This is the donation funding will help us continue to fill some gaps that we have. And yes, Honorable Slater, you're correct. This $1.5 million and actually only will provide services for one isolation hotel. The expense of running these facilities full wraparound services, meaning patients are seen by health professionals, making sure they're okay, and also that they have meals provided to them until they fully recover. And if they do decompose or their health conditions get worse, they have to transfer them to the nearest health facility. That's how they're situated. And so there is a lot of discussion that still needs to happen around responding to the pandemic. And we are filling the services as much as we can. There are IHS dollars that were given to 638 and also the federal entities. I'm not aware of their expenditures on how they're responding, but of course they have to run a healthcare facility, and also they're dealing with third-party reimbursement issues with their own staffing, and so there is a big need to respond to the pandemic. And one day I think I had talked about just recently to look at the financial impact of trying to operate this. We're very large, but we're also need to ensure that there are some basic preventive access to services that we maintain. So right now, there is a limitation, as I mentioned, to dollars that come down from Indian Health Service, especially for Department of Health. There is probably a larger picture on how much COVID dollars were given to health facilities, but under Department of Health, it's around $6 million, but that's not all slated. Currently, isolation and quarantine services are not even considered in any sort of funding pool. But I look forward to, in this new administration, to find opportunities for dollars that are coming down. Even the new IHS dollars, the supplemental 5 that are coming down, are only related to vaccinations and testing as well. So I think there's a challenge that we need to let legislators know in Congress that because of our situation here on Navajo, and they're aware of it too, with the many individuals, multi-generational housing situation we have, is one factor that I think will continue to impact us. But when the dollars come down from the federal agencies, those dollars aren't earmarked for that. So I think there needs to be some effort, and we'll continue to support our position regarding this type of services for our Navajo people. So, and thank you very much, and I'll hand it over to Dr. Yellowman.
Thank you, Dr. Jim. Yate, honorable members of the Budget and Finance Committee. Ahiahat do nana ahiahat to our sponsor, Delegate Slater. Thank you for the legislation here. I just want to touch on Delegate Crotty's question on the intent and purpose of the donation fund and the content and material that will be utilized with these funds. Under 73-20, we were legislated to provide direct relief through the chapter assessments and legislation. And it was through those efforts or identification of items needed by the community that were addressed. Those items were deemed as essential items and met the criteria or met the categories under legislation 73-20. Currently, these items that are at the warehouse, temporary warehouse, are water, vitamins, care packages, hygiene kits, sanitation items, food packages, hand warmers. So those are the items that are currently being distributed to the 105 chapters. And we deem these essential items, and chapters are preparing to distribute them as immediate as they receive them. So I just want to touch on the content and the value of the items that are being distributed under the emergency. Thank you.
Chair Henyo, can I make one further comment?
Go ahead, Shinanda. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I don't know if everyone in the committee has seen yet, but there was a document that was released by the Biden administration. The paragraph, of course, buried way at the end that talked about tribes said $20 billion. And it wasn't clear whether those $20 billion are going to be treated similar to the CARES Act dollars and maybe have fewer restrictions based off of the feedback from the Navajo Nation and other tribes, or if it's alluding to some other program. I think in the same proposal, there's $350 billion that's proposed for state and local authorities, and it's unclear if the 20 billion would come out of the 350 or this 20 billion is in line with what was presented by the Democrats when the CARES is going through for tribes. So I think there's a strong possibility that if there are similar provisions that were set aside under the CARES Act, where you were able to reimburse yourself for expenditures as long as they weren't, I think, in a budget as of March 27th or something like that. You know, those are the things that we need to keep our finger on the pulse in DC and make sure that we're pressing the Washington office so that when this big package comes down the line, we can look at reimbursing ourselves for some of these expenditures that we've made out of our own pocket that the federal government really should be paying for. And then on the other side is funding to the federal resources. So to IHS, you know, they're proposing a lot of funding into Health and Human Services. I think that's another opportunity with this administration to push for, you know, funding like the ACSs, FE support, contact tracing, all of those things. But yeah, I just want to provide a little hope, considering that that document came out a day or two ago. Thank you, Chair.
Appreciate you getting up for that additional response, Shinanda. Back to your committee members, Shinanda, Delegate Ember, South County, does that help you with the responses? Does that help with your questions?
Thank you, Chairman Henyo. I'd like to, actually, I need a few follow-up questions.
Okay, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman, committee members, and sponsor. I think in looking at this budget and in terms of intent, it's still in terms of Department of Health response. Service are expensive. My concern is that your scope or your service is very limited. It's only limited to the Chinle service area, is my understanding. And so I don't know how we can consider that a Navajo Nation response when you're only servicing those in the Chinle service area. We have needs across Navajo Nation, and from this budget, I do not see how those other service units or other communities are going to benefit from the donations that were made on behalf of all Navajo Nation people. What I'm asking the committee, and I'm looking for in terms of the agents, is how do we make sure that we're providing resources to meet to support the needs of our constituents in all 5 agencies, and so in looking at that, I'm questioning, and I don't see any documentation that is attached to this legislation regarding the subcontracting request. In particular, the state Chinle Unified School District request for more than $500,000. We've had this discussion on council in terms of how entities can support and provide resources to Navajo Nation during this time. I want to see the documents, and if Navajo Nation had asked the state or the Chinle Unified School District to provide those resources to the community members that they serve. So I need to dig down a little bit more in terms of why is there a cost for $750,000. The other question in terms of this budget that I'm looking at is the PAE contract. I'd like to see a copy of that because I want to make sure the services that they're providing expand beyond just their current scope. If we are paying this amount of money, what are we getting in return? And I think in terms of now being in month 11, there should be, if I'm just asking for Northern Agency, I'm fine with that because I represent Northern Agency on the committee. So I'm just going to stick with Northern Agency for now, but I'm concerned about Eastern, Fort, Western, what's happening in terms of how we're providing services. And because I think at this point, when we go down to the emergency assistance, the 3.7 million, that's all that the people are going to provide direct services from. So the whole nation is going to split up 3.7 million. And right now at this time, I'm having some concern with, and then I wanted to talk about the NECA contract. I'd like to see a copy of that. And I know there was a report, and I understand that they were the lowest bid, but that also I need to do some pushback and say, if chapters and what chapters are willing and able to contribute and be part of the solution. If we go back into history and we look at what happened, the devastation on September 11th, and when people were stuck on the island of Manhattan, what others did, they got in their boats, and it was the biggest public effort to get to rescue people. And I think we still have untapped resources like our chapters and like other individuals who can help with the distribution to cut down on some of the costs. And I think we just need to be a little bit innovative in that way and see if that's a possibility to reduce what is the current proposed request. Because if in looking at this, like I'm looking, okay, we have $8.7 million. If we even divide $8 million into 5 agencies, we should be at this committee pulling in and looking at $1.6 million of services for our agency. And so that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at how can I bring in $1.6 million to help the relief effort in Northern Agency. Thank you.
Christina, again, for those questions, comments. I'll defer back to you, Vice Chair Slater, for a response.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Shema, for the questions. So this PAE contract is not just for the alternative care site that's located in Finley. It covers the isolation sites, in Winslow, in Farmington, in Gallup, in Kayenta. I think there's one or maybe two in Finley. So it is not just for Finley, and I just want to make that clear. It's to serve where there are hotels and we can help our constituents across the board, across the nation. And I think it'd be helpful if the Department of Health could provide the committee, both Budget and Finance and HES, an expenditure report that shows how much money is being spent at each site and what the utilization is. And I'm sure Dr. Jim in a moment will be able to respond to that question. But again, this is for the whole of the Navajo Nation. And my assumption is that most money is actually being spent at the isolation sites. It's not being spent at the alternative care sites. In terms of PAE and NECA contracts, I'll defer to Dr. Jim and Dr. Yellowman on how those are constructed. In terms of innovation and cutting down costs, I agree with you. I think at this point, though, because the programs were so overwhelmed and trying to do so much at one time, that doing things traditionally makes sense and is understandable, and that you would get logistically one unified contract to handle all of the logistics. And in terms of having the internal capacity from the Division of Community Development to say handle a bunch of different boats or a bunch of different trucks or all of those things, and then have the accountability because these are federal funds, we need to be able to verify where things went, they were signed off, and that they were delivered appropriately. In the future, I think that these are things the Navajo Nation should be able to accomplish internally, and I agree with you there, but I just think we also need to recognize the circumstances and the obligations we have to our people in terms of accountability. So on the isolation, the ACSs, we need to make sure that these stay in place so that we don't overwhelm our healthcare system. And so these isolation sites are incredibly important for mitigating the spread within our multi-generational homes. As these new strains become more prevalent and start to take over across COVID infections in the United States, I think it's all the more important that we reduce the number of people who are entering our healthcare system in IHS, and that's what we're doing here. So, Dr. Jim, I'll hand it off to you. Thank you.
Thank you for the question again, Shema, on the services that are being provided, and I certainly can provide a copy of the contract, and the contract mainly relates to testing, isolation, quarantine, and an alternate care site. Right now, the alternate care site is not, is quite a little bit more expensive, and the numbers are going down, so we're focusing on the isolation and quarantine. Even that's quite high as well for the to offset a lot of these beds that could overwhelm, or our system is actually already strained right now, to be honest. And when we think about the entire pandemic, there's a lot of moving parts that we have to manage. And a lot of these costs, there's the exact immediate need for people to have water and resources, but there's also those that are either impacted indirectly that have COVID or do have COVID, or in order to either stay home, but under the Department of Health, I think what we do, our focus is to always try to work with our unified command structure to provide services. We have provided different isolation sites into December. We were out in Socorro, we were in Gallup, Kayenta, and Holbrook. So we did reach most areas, and we assessed the utilization of these isolation areas. And when we began reducing, not having that much funds, I had to reduce but the most utilized areas that were effective in getting more people to use the entire bed count was Farmington for the Shiprock area, and also to the city. And Chinle is a stable site for us because these agreements were already made prior to the pandemic. Chinle Unified School District was already identified as an RSS site through their emergency response. So there was already a pre-existing plan, and so when the pandemic started, we didn't really have to do any new agreements because that agreement was already in place through the FEP program under the Department of Health. So that's why I want to make sure that there is, and we didn't anticipate the pandemic to be this long. And obviously, it has impacted us financially in many ways, either as individuals or either institutions and community members and the Navajo Nation. And at the Kutcha Holges, at Asana, Katon, the Witch Holges. Those are thousand that do the Ostoid any Helgeni, the Satnan, Banahan Negrayo, Washed at the neat ego dea do Ashing, but Badahanits and the emergency response of Yeni. It takes a whole village. Nil Swashin de Nishodea and Besabo Hohendatle. A with about Hanizin do Alcoichin Quadi, Abeso Quadi, his apartment, Kuchin Hindehe, os Besnos, a with Besnosnish Aja Besogi, Abenesh, Benesh Haja. Because these are like CDC dollars and other dollars. And emergency procurement has not improved. It needs to get better. We can do it. Emergency procurement. No, I mean, we went through a lot. Dyson Angido, Jayadil Kiki, Coachon Hall, Jijo. It's not in the state. Francis Cass, but Ethia, Classata, Besos, Latino, the Quad hidden never cut the Japanese. So, but what audition is what they had this to us for Francis Castle, National Creature, Zale and the store on hidden never. And that is what we call equity. A crab buses the door, our creature, what hidden never and Dashna store. It's very difficult to manage this, and I just want to thank you guys for this opportunity to have me just share a little bit about this. So I can't on. Dr. Yellowman.
Yeah, Dr. Jim. I don't know, honorable members of Budget and Finance. I just want to touch a little bit on the question from Delegate Crotty regarding NECA and how we came to choose NECA. Just some background information on the legislation that we're trying to implement. It was signed into law October 9th, and October, November, December, January, we're now right after our third month, which items were selected by the community or the needs assessment and uploaded and then procured and delivered. And that's a lot. A lot has happened in the last 3 months for this particular legislation. And as such, the massive amount of goods that were delivered from these purchases, again, is just roughly around 9,100 pallets of goods, which equates to a little over 400 truckloads needing to be dispatched and delivered throughout the Navajo Nation. So ideally, and for safety concerns, we do need large semi-trucks to distribute these bulk items. We are also entertaining when safety permits a scheduling sequence for local chapters to come and receive their selected items. But that's really one for safety concerns. Right now we have a schedule where our trucks, large semi trucks, do enter the ground. These are zero contact. Only the truck drivers can confirm the safety latches on each of those pallets before they drive off to a community. So there's some COVID safety precautions, and then there's large semi truck precautions that the trucking industry is more familiar with. I did observe 7 large semi trucks enter the Gamerico site and then exit, and there's quite a bit of large heavy machinery there. Once it is anticipated that once we are able to decrease or at least put a dent in what we have currently as far as large bulk pallet items, we would then open the opportunity for local chapters to utilize their own. And again, there's some calculations that have been that are needing to be addressed. Some of the chapters have gooseneck or flatbeds, and those can only carry a certain amount of weight versus the semi trucks. And so when we have chapters coming in with a trailer or a flatbed, there's some calculations that need to be adhered to, and that can influence how the schedules are made. When we are ready for that, we do welcome that local sweat equity to partake. But given that these items, 1, are in direct COVID relief, 2, we're still operating under an emergency, and 3, we're dealing with large numbers of bulk items that require machinery to load and offload. We're just trying to focus on those areas right now, and then invite local chapters to enter into insert local chapter assets into those scheduling. I do have a copy of the contract, and I can send that to you as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that response. There was a request for 2 contracts. Who would be able to deliver those 2 contracts? Is Dr. Jim or Dr. Yellowman?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Who could deliver the contract?
Yes, there were 2 contracts that were being requested for. One was PAE, the PAE contract, and the other one is, I believe you referenced that already. So that's one question that request is still hanging out there. Who can deliver those contracts?
Okay, thank you,
Copies
sir.
of those contracts.
I can send those. I can send the NECA one. Thank you.
Okay, NECA from Dr. Yellowman and Dr. Jim are able to do the PAE contract, provide copies of it. Dr. Jim, are you still there?
Yes, Chair. Can you repeat that? I was doing a report on our command center. Sorry.
There was a request for a copy of the PAE contract.
Oh.
Are you able to present the committee?
Yes. I don't know if you want the original contract or the continued task orders. I think we're in our task order 3 or 4. I can do the current task order and the original one. Do you want me to send it to Honorable Crotty and yourself?
Send it to Peggy, and Peggy get this.
Okay.
Katrina, thank you. Committee members, any further questions?
Chairman, this is Delegate Friday.
Commissioner Nanda, go ahead. Floor.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the clarification on the PAE contract. And so I'd like to just retract my comments regarding that it was only serving the Chinle service area. I think when I see the contract, I'll have a better idea in terms of the service they're providing, and also in understanding, the capacity of the nation. Then at what point, because this is a premium cost, I think it's we should be, or there should be a directive, or there could be a directive that if there's another entity or another program that could assist with providing this service, because what is the breakdown per client that they provide services to, and what's not clear, and just in my experience the last month in having to help individuals, secure motel costs, if there's a contractor out there who's being well paid to deliver this service, then what is the accountability, and then how do we make sure that the charges, or what they're, if it's case by case, then what's the overhead charge? Like, what are they charging us to manage those individual cases? Because something needs to be improved, I would say, at least in my end, in my experience. So I'd like to see that contract, and then how are we being accountable, and then what's the breakdown? So if they're serving 20 people this month, like what are they charging us? What are we paying for that? And the other thing that I wanted to comment on, and I'm going to take back to my district and my agency, I'm just breaking down the NECA contract, and I understand that was possibly the lowest amount that came in to provide the service, but just dividing that $1.1 million by 5, that's $234,000. So I just want to have a conversation with our agency about, what does that look like in terms of transportation? What do they expect that needs to be delivered? Because if I divide that into the amount of chapters we have, that's about, at least for my agency, it's about $12,000 per chapter. And not knowing like transportation and delivery costs and what they should expect, I think I would want to see that breakdown too with community development, because I want to go back to making sure that supplies that are picked up and then delivered to meet the federal audit requirements. I agree with that process, but I'm trying to understand the rationale from paying for premium delivery service. So is it just we need to make sure it gets to the chapter? Because we could work maybe give that $12,000 to the chapter so that they could develop a transportation plan. I'm not quite sure. I'm not there yet, and I'm trying to understand this a little bit more. Thank you. I'll go back on mute.
For those questions and comments. One more before we go back to the presenter. Committee members, is there any questions or comments?
This is Delegate Yellowhair.
Delegate Yellowhair, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, good afternoon to the chair, the vice chair, and my colleagues. So thank you for the report, Honorable Slaters. Dr. Yellowman and Jill, Shemayer, Aaron Dasaziri, Perlin Kurt, OOC controller. I did even know that this comes on. Have you ever sent back a letter thank you letter to all those who donate the money, that also a list of the name, the amount that was donated, donator from donate to the Navajo Nation, a list of names with a total amount listing under the descriptions, and that should be a reflects or calculated to $8 million. Do we have that list? If we do, we should provide that information to a Paginakai so we can see that list who all donate the money, and that should reflect to $8 million. Other important is letter of appreciation to who donate the money. And I understand that this money is $8 million. I guess this money is calculated mostly in 2020 to donate money to the Navajo Nation, COVID-19. Area banadishkida celeste peso, but I use Nilida as a budget avocado, adon the Haneland area it has J. Era J. Budget avocado at a hello. List alone that's a high roster list in financial report. You joined or legal calculation that need $8 million. With I Perlin Zidbidishki. I thought the young man too. I don't know, so it's not Andalia, but here's Seniki. Benadishkidas. Chair. Thank you. I will hear Honorable Slater. Thank you for your great help. Bring this legislation before Budget and Finance Committee. Thank you. What error so.
No, Delegate here. With this, I'll defer back to our presenter and your agents, Shananta. Delegate Slater, you provide a response to the two delegates that were asking questions.
Thank you very much, Chair. In regard to Doug Yellowhair's question, I'll have to defer to the controller on how we could go about doing thank you letters, and maybe that'd be an effort that the chief of staff of the executive branch could help coordinate across the branches. I think that we on the legislative side should also consider how we can extend our appreciation to people who donated. So I'd be happy to sign some letters and put a little personal flourish there. In regard to Shima Delicati's questions, I think the line of thinking or reasoning is trying to figure out from the Division of Community Development how we can build more community capacity when we do confront these challenges, and not just use it as an opportunity to, I shouldn't say not as an opportunity, that we don't just reflexively send money to the larger, better capitalized institutions like NECA, but think about how to diversify where our contracts go, as well as what we can do to build the capacity at the chapter level for transportation, trucking, things like that. And my request to you, Dr. Yellowman, is that we are going to continue to confront COVID over the next year. And you're hearing this feedback now. Can we look at ways to develop a little more community capacity for logistics support? And that way, I think, issues like this in the future could permit chapters to do their own sort of logistics or transport if they're capable of doing it. They will be faster with the locally certified ones. I know right now I don't think that is a possibility, and that's the position that I've come to. But that's my request of you, and I think if you can also respond to Delegate Crotty's other comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that response. Dr. Jim?
Yes, Honorable Chair Henyo. I'm trying to think about what the question was. I'm sorry, Honorable Slater. Can you repeat the response or the statement?
Chair Henio, did we have a question for Dr. Jim, or were they more targeted toward Dr. Yellen? I think I might have missed it if it was for Dr. Jim. I
I'm sorry,
apologize.
Dr. Yellowman. Okay, let's Dr. Yellowman.
Yeah, thank you. Chair Henyo, Adonana here to our sponsor, and for the question. The need for the chapters to build their capacity or their response to COVID. I think from the onset of the pandemic, many of the chapters were responsive. We were participating through the HCOC ICS structure, where many of the chapters participated in the pods, the points of distribution, and under the ICS structure, we were part of the command structure where the chapters, one, have CERT, two, need to strengthen those efforts and to strengthen their capacity through their CERT teams. Some of our chapters do have an emergency response team that are volunteered or led by volunteers. And so those do need to be revisited. There needs to be some resources and training addressed or allocated. And I think that's where there's a good opportunity for us to work with DEM in doing so. In the past, many of the chapters have responded to weather-like emergencies. However, this being a public health pandemic changed how we now address emergencies or emergency responses or emergency response teams. We had to put in place zero contact distributions. We had to put in place measures for burials and et cetera at the local chapter level, which was all very new. And even today, having to respond to how we travel and making sure that these, even our chapter staff are still adhering to CDC guidelines, their emergency reopening or return to operation plans. Those are consistent and constantly needing to be revisited at the chapter level. But in essence, I feel, yes, that the chapters within their capacity, within their ability, did respond to COVID. Do we need to do more? That is a strong yes. Do we need to strengthen those local CERT teams and emergency response teams? Yes, we do. That has not been overlooked in any way and has not been undervalued in any way. And I think many of the chapters and local chapter officials really have responded to the best way that they could. Even our communications was compromised at first, learning how to utilize technology and maximize technology, especially for many of our elderly Navajo who are bilingual. So even overcoming some of those challenges, I do think we have come a long way in the 11 months. And now chapters have been very responsive to the number of items that they will be receiving through this chapter distribution and have created their distribution plans. Those distribution plans, one, assess their capacity, their current capacity. Does the chapter have the capacity to hold a number of pallets? And then what is their plan to distribute? So those plans are worked out with ASC. ASC communicates with those local chapters. There are some chapters that goes back to them being non-certified. And then, of course, we have some of the certified chapters that have a little bit more autonomy and their ability to procure or reach out to resources, and some of them have done that. And so even there's some additional details as to how those chapters would respond as well. I am preparing the email right now, Delegate Crotty, to send the service contract to you. The breakdown is 1.7. The original, an additional cost that we did look into were other companies who specialize in deployment of resources. We did have ongoing conversations with the National Guard, Arizona DEMA, Utah DEMA, and New Mexico DEMA. Because of the status of the Navajo Nation and how they would have an agreement with National Guard, those costs came in very high. And then we had other companies that we looked at. Other companies were also offered by Baker Tilly, but the NECA one was substantially the lowest and most available. What in exchange we get is the CDL certified truck drivers. We get their capacity to move these items. We also get assets to their forklifts or equivalent, and their operators, swampers, straps, all of these equipment, which normally I think anybody could go down to a Home Depot and buy these, but we just don't have that capacity here. So to procure a company like NECA who already has all of these equipment, and they specialize in transporting large, heavy items, it was a fit. And during the emergency, they have already been moving and stood ready for us to get to this point of the securing the finances for the contract. So I am including that language in this email, and I hope that answers your question, Delegate Crotty. Thank you.
Dr. Shake now for that response. Committee members, any further questions or comments? Yeah, we're on the main motion. There's no amendments being proposed. Call for the question if there's no amendments.
Chair Henio, this is Delegate Slater.
Yes, I'm trying to get.
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to get a committee. I'm trying to get a committee member to move that amendment forward. Is there an amendment, committee members? There was a request for an amendment.
I'm sorry, Chair. Before we move on to the amendment, may I ask, is any of this proposed services, is any of it FEMA reimbursable?
Back to, I believe, Delegate Slater, you covered that, but you would provide a response regarding that.
Yeah. So for I think the isolation and alternative care site contract, they've packaged that so that it can be FEMA reimbursable on the heads.
Delegate Slater, you're cutting off. We could barely hear you.
Chair Henio, can you hear me now?
Oh, now we can hear you.
Okay, I had to disconnect the internet. So just to recount what I was saying, the PAE contract and the services provided under that contract should be 75% reimbursable, but they've been in communication with FEMA on, I think, the congregate setting, so that would be the ACS and the isolation parts of the contract, and that may be up to 90% reimbursable. I think that they're working with President Nez on signing some paperwork to affect that point. With Dr. Yellowman and logistical support for the, pardon me, for I'm really sorry, committee. I can't control that. For the trucking, I think you have to defer to Controller Kirk and Dr. Yellowman.
Okay, Dr. Yellowman.
Thank you, Nana, for that question. In my conversations with our FEMA representative, Mr. Wesley Todd, in order for this particular portion of the services would not be reimbursable because we would need to identify every individual who would be receiving these items. Just a tedious amount of work, but an additional criteria. But at this point, it would not be reimbursable. Thank you.
Christina, and also, Shema, Ms. Perlinkert, do you have anything to add? Okay, back to Santa. Delegate Amber Cuddy. Does that help you with your responses?
Oh, thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that clarification. My question would just be then, in this legislation, like the heavy equipment, if Legislative Council can let me know if that language is in this legislation or if we have room and opportunity to amend to include legislation as such that FEMA, I would say the FEMA money that's reimbursed would go back then to this account and not just, I don't know if FEMA reimbursement goes to general funds. I'm not exactly sure that process. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Sheikh Yala for that question. Ms. Kristen Lowe.
Chairman Hino, Kristen had to get off the clock. This is Dana. So I'm double checking that. Just a second. I think we do need, I think we probably will need an amendment, but I just want to double check. Yeah, I think we do need an amendment, and I'll get it to you in just a second.
Okay, well, on that amendment language, Dana, I'll defer back to the committee. At the beginning of the meeting, there was a request for an amendment that was held out to the committee members. Are there any questions, comments, or amendments that need to be presented?
Select Chair, this is Delegate Yellow here. My phone was dropped. I don't know if they answered my questions about to send a letter of appreciation back to donators on Lenigi that donate to the Navajo Nation's letter of appreciation auto. And then we need a list of those donator. We need a list of names and a total amount that was given to the Navajo Nation's aid. I don't know if there's been answered that one. But not Shinigate, Totnana, not Kagune, when they received this money to the Navajo Nation, have they sent a receipt back to them to the donator? So I know they can probably may use for their income tax purpose. Once it is Dr. Yellowman, Perlin Controller. Chair, thank you.
Okay. On this question, they gave regarding the thank you letter, receipt, and also listing of names and requests to provide the listing. Ms. Kirk, with the controller's office, is Perlin Kirk or any of the OOC staff to provide a response to Delegate Yellowhair's question?
Chair, this is Controller. So in terms of the Delegate Yellowhair's question, I think there's different sources of the donations. One is the GoFundMe. So all we get is a list. Sometimes they don't give us names. So separate. So we wouldn't be able to give out some sort of thank you note. The other one is the credit card through the donations web page in DOH Command Center. And that one, we are able to give receipts automatically as soon as someone makes a donation via their credit card. There's an automatic response, and that automatic response, they can use that for their tax purposes. It has the verbiage that DOJ wanted in there. But in some cases, there are some requests, especially those entities that have higher amounts. So sometimes we have to manually send a letter if that's needed. So that's the credit cards. And then the others are, we do have a list of the checks that come in by mail. On all of these, it was discussed early on. DOJ did undertake the donation branch of the command center. And so there was early discussion on who was going to do it. I know at one point, I believe OPVP wanted to do it. This is like early on, I would say, in the spring, a year ago. And so I don't know if anybody has done it. OOC can't do it. We don't have the capacity to do it. We don't have the budget to buy stamps. We're talking about, we were just asking about if we were to print out all the information and the list of all donations. Obviously, we have the checks that come in, and then we also will have a list of the credit card payments. Those two right there is in excess of 700 pages. And then we have the GoFundMe, which DOJ has set up, and I'm not sure how that list looks like, but those are the three that we have. So right now, I mean, it would be nice if somebody volunteers and sends thank you letters, but that's the amount that we're talking about. I mean, it's if it were to be a list, it's over 700 pages. So that's my response.
Thank you for that response. Back to some Delegate Yellowhair. So 700 pages then. Delegate Jimmy Yellowhair.
Okay, Chair, I'm sorry I was on mute. Anyway, thank you very much. As a Budget Finance Committee, the report can be made to a Budget Finance Committee on a special meeting. Thank you very much, Phyllis.
Okay. Back to a committee members. Before I call for the question, there was a request for an amendment. The committee members, do you wish to entertain an amendment or go straight to the vote?
Chair, this is Delegate Claudia.
Delegate Amber Canales-Bacari.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to are we able to do the FEMA language amendment at this committee meeting, or does Legislative Council need additional time? Thank you, Chair.
I believe Dana is working on it right now as we speak, and I believe she was able to do it in like 5 minutes.
Chairman Henio?
Hold on, one at a time. So that's what I was getting at. So with that, Dana, how much time would you need?
Thank you, Chairman. I sent out the FEMA amendment to yourself, Delegate Crotty, Delegate Slater, and Peggy a few minutes ago. In addition, there is an amendment that Ms. Lowell sent out at 3:48 p.m. that I believe has not been made yet, and it was updating the budget. Thank you.
Okay. Agashina, thank you for that, Dana. Delegate Amber Crotty, you do have an amendment drafted by Dana on the FEMA language. I yield the floor to you.
Thank you, Chairman Henio, for Amendment 1, and if staff can read it into the record to add FEMA language. Thank you.
With that, Peggy, into the record for us.
Okay, members of the Budget and Finance Committee and the advisors, I did just barely email that amendment from Dana Bobroff, and I'm hoping that you got it. The time that it was sent is at 5:20, and it reads, Amendment to Legislation Number 0319-20, sponsored by Honorable Crotty. 1, on page 3, line 11, insert new section as follows. Section 4, COVID-19 Response Donation Fund Reimbursement. The COVID-19 response, this is new language, the COVID-19 Response Donation Fund shall be reimbursed for any eligible expenditures set forth in this legislation from any eligible FEMA reimbursement and or other federal funding, specifically including additional congressional appropriations for COVID-19 related relief made available to the Navajo Nation. Can you hear me?
Yes.
There's a lot of background noise. 2, renumber or re-letter succeeding. Renumber or re-letter succeeding paragraph. Sections and or exhibits accordingly, necessarily, and if necessary, adjust any dollar amount accordingly, and this amendment shall supersede inconsistent language contained in any other committee amendment which shall be conformed to the intent or language of this amendment. The Office of Legislative Services, with notice to the sponsors of the legislation, is hereby authorized to make necessary grammatical changes. Mr. Chair.
Kashin for that reading of the amendment. There's a motion on the floor by Delegate Amber Crotty for amendment number 1. Is there a second, committee members?
Yellow hair.
Delegate Jimmy Yellow Hair seconds that. So amendment number 1, there's a motion and second. Committee members, is there any questions or comments on amendment number 1? I'll call for the question on amendment number 1. Delegate Jimmy Yellow Hair.
I'll vote green. Thank you.
Delegate Jimmy Yellow Hair votes green. Delegate Vice Chair Smith. Vice Chair Smith on amendment number 1. Okay, Delegate Amber Crotty on amendment number 1?
Delegate Amber Canisbaugh Karate votes green. Thank you.
Okay. For the record, Delegate Amber Canisbaugh Karate votes green. Delegate Nathaniel Brown.
Delegate Brown votes green.
For the record, Delegate Nathaniel Brown votes green. Delegate Elmer P. Begay. Delegate Elmer P. Begay. Back up to Vice Chair Smith. No, Vice Chair Smith. We do have a vote tally of 3 in favor, 0 opposed, Chair not voting, Vice Chair Smith and Delegate Elmer P. Begay not voting. Amendment number 1 passes. With that, committee members, are there any other amendments?
This is Delegate Karate Simmons.
Go ahead, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I did receive, or looking at my email, I did receive the latest proposed amendment. If I could ask, if we could clarify what that language states. There was a prior amendment language without supporting documents. Can we get staff just to clarify what is that proposed amendment? I don't know if Legislative Council wants to provide that. And if we're in order, then I could possibly make that motion, but I'm trying to be careful on what wording is in there. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, this is Peggy. I have that information. Kristen Lowell sent out an amendment at 3:48 p.m. and it says revised amendment 0319-20 exhibits, and it has three attachments to it. The last one is the amendment language to the legislation. And then it has the Section 164 review form for the Division of Public Safety, and then it has the OMB memo from Lisa Jim dated January 20th, 2021, and I believe also the controllers. Or actually, it's just OMB is attached. So that's the amendment that Kristen had sent to us. Chair, are you still there?
I'm here. I was just trying not to cough into the phone here, but with that clarification, Dana, do you have anything to add?
No, Chairman Henry, I've reviewed what Kristen provided, and it looks right to me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. With that, back to Delegate Amber Canisbaugh. Does that provide some clarification on your question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. I'd like to make the motion for the second amendment, Chair, but I would like to modify, so I do need to know if Legislative Council, I want to include the PAE contract that was provided by Department of Health and the NECA contract that was provided by Department of Community Development. I'm not sure if they received a copy, but I could forward, or if that language could be included into this amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, with that, Dana, are you able to add this modification to the amendment that was crafted by Ms. Kristen Lowell?
Chairman Henry, I apologize, but I was not on that part of the call. One, I don't have the contract, and two, are they part of what going to be funded out of the budget? And I apologize, I'm not, we don't generally attach contracts to legislation, so I'm not sure exactly what I should be doing here. I'm sure I can do it, though, I just don't know.
Okay, so you need. Delegate Yellow Hair. Delegate Yellow Hair. Can you mute your phone, please?
I'm very sorry. I did not.
I was turning to the streets, so just you can mute your phone. With that, Peggy, would you be able to send a copy of the contracts to Dana that was sent by Department of Health and the Community Development?
Mr. Chair, I already did.
Okay.
And she should have those because momentarily, probably about a minute, 2 minutes ago, I did that.
Okay. One more question. If you look at the new budgets, I'm looking on budget form 4. It does mention those contracts. I believe it does. It mentions the NECA contract, and it mentions the alternative. Wait, I thought I saw it. It mentions, I guess, PAE Technologies COPE. I guess my question is, what you want me to just attach the contracts to the budgets, and they're already identified in the budget form.
Okay. With that, I'll go back to the sponsor of this proposed amendment, Shenandoah Delegate Amber Crotty. If you could provide guidance to our legislative council.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was requesting if they could be added as exhibits. They're not part of the legislative packet, and so just to be used as additional information for those subcontracts.
Thank you. My recommendation is going to be that you just attach them to what in Kristen's amendment is labeled as, just a moment, I'm going to find out what exhibit it is. Oh, dang it. Just a second. They should, Peggy, I don't think you actually need to do a separate exhibit here. Just when you are reading the amendment language that Kristen developed, just attach the 2 contracts to Exhibit B. They'll just become additional documents under Exhibit B.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that guidance, Dana. So back to our sponsor for the amendment number 2, Shenandoah Delegate Amber Crotty. You still would want to make that motion?
Yes, Chair, if I could make that motion with that additional language to add the NECA contract and the P8 contract under Exhibit B. Thank you.
Okay, Sheena. Yeah, now with that, we have a motion on the floor for amendment number 2. And Peggy, if you would read amendment number 2 into the record for us.
Okay. Members of the committee, I'm hoping that you have these, the amendment. Okay, amendment, I'm reading the third document in that email that Kristen sent to us. So one, amendment to legislation number 0319-20. One, in Exhibit B, replace the existing budget forms, quote, parentheses, Form 1, 2, and 4, in parentheses, with the new budget forms. This amendment will replace Exhibit B in its entirety. And then I wrote, including the NECA and PAE contracts in Exhibit B. 2, add 2 OMB memos dated January 20th, 2021 as Exhibit C. 3, page 2, line 20, insert new paragraph F and G as follows. So this is new language. F, the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, has reviewed the budget forms prepared by the Department of Emergency Management and provided 2 memoranda, which are attached as Exhibit C. G, new language. Notwithstanding the issues noted by OMB, the Budget and Finance Committee is satisfied that the legislation has been drafted to conform with the donation fund management plan at Exhibit A. 4, renumber or reletter succeeding paragraphs, sections, or exhibits accordingly if necessary. This amendment shall supersede inconsistent language contained in any other committee amendment, which shall be conformed to the intent or language of this amendment. The Office of Legislative Services, with notice to the sponsors of the legislation, is hereby authorized to make necessary grammatical changes. So then going to the other document, the 164 document has a document number 015708, I believe. That is attached. It's a Section 164 document, and then and that consists of 14 pages. And then the OMB memo, which consists of 27 pages, is dated January 20th, 2021, and it's signed by Lisa Jim, Acting Budget Officer, Office of Management and Budget. And this is pertaining to their OMB's review of the 164 process. Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. And then how many pages does the 2 contracts have? The NECA and the PAE?
The NECA contract consists of 17 pages, and then the PAE contract consists of 15 pages. And I'll fix the language for the amendment that I added language for Exhibit B.
Okay, Shana. Thank you a lot, Peggy, for that reading of amendment number 2. Committee members, is there a second to amendment number 2?
Yellow hair. Yellow hair.
Delegate Jimmy Yellow Hair. Second. There's an motion and a second to amendment number 2. Committee members, are there any questions or comments on amendment number 2?
Chair Hanyo, this is Vice Chair Smith.
Vice Chair Smith, go ahead, Chairman. Vice Chair Smith?
Yes, Chair Hanyo, some noise in the background. Did we do Amendment 1? I had my phone dropped and I was trying to get back on, and now we're at Amendment 2. So, Amendment 1, was that passed?
Yes, there was a vote of 3 in favor, 0 opposed, and Vice Chair Smith and Delegate Elmer P. Begay not voting. on amendment number 1, which is language for reimbursement, either from FEMA or other federal contracts, or if there's another round of congressional CARES COVID relief money. That was amendment number 1.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for catching me up. So Amendment 2 is now with the one that you were trying to get committee members to entertain regarding the Exhibit B and Exhibit C and Exhibit A to be switched out so that we could have this amendment put on the for discussion. With the
with the addition that the PAE contract and the NECA contract be also attached under Exhibit B.
Okay, Chair, I have a question on the new budget form. There is that per diem travel, and the other budget that was first in there didn't have no per diem. And now we have, I think, 44,000. It's kind of hard to try to follow along when you're on the computer, but I'm doing the best I can. But anyway, what I'm saying is in that new amendment 2, it has per diem in there. And if you look at the Exhibit A under the fund management plan, under C3, it specifically has the do's and don'ts. The fund shall not be used to fund ... cost budget for the nation's annual comprehensive budget. Now, Department of Health is under the Navajo Nation's annual comprehensive budget. And I'm sure they have travel monies in there. And this is not allowable under Exhibit A, Shananda. So if we're going to be amending that to allow Exhibit A with disregarding C3 of what is in the fund management plan under Exhibit A, then I think this is amendments out of order, Shananta, if we're going to allow that, because I know the Department of Health has monies in there for their per diem and travel expense, because it's already stipulated in Exhibit A. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question, Vice Chair Smith. I'll defer to Dana. I think you can provide an explanation on that.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you, Delegate Smith, for diving so deeply into this. It's actually Exhibit A, and unfortunately there's not page numbers on it, but it's the second to the last page of Exhibit A under C3, and it states that the fund shall not be used to fund meeting stipends, the department's payroll expenses, or other costs budgeted for in the Navajo Nation's annual comprehensive budget. So that says meeting stipends, and as you're aware, meeting stipends are like you go to a meeting and you get a set stipend for that meeting. Sometimes it's $300, sometimes it's $150, sometimes it's $500. Just really depends on the situation. However, if you go to the detailed budget on it's budget form 4, page 3 of 4, and this is on the new budget documents, under travel expenses, object code 3230, it says per diem mills. and then it has lodging, and then it has mileage. Those travel expenses, when they're broken up that way, those are not the same as stipends. They actually are not paid in a set amount. They are receipt-based, so they are different. They're also taxed differently. So it is my opinion that the budget is fine. It complies with the fund management plan, and all is in order. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Okay, back to Vice Chair Smith. Does that help you with your question?
Thanks, Chairman Henio, and thank you, Dana. It reads, Chair, are other costs budgeted for in the nation's annual comprehensive budget? Now, when we're doing the Navajo Nation's annual budget, the cost is in there for per diem. I'd like to have DOJ's opinion on that, because we are going against Exhibit A. The first budget was okay. But as I was looking at the amendment, that's what caught my attention. Yes, it's clearly stating funds meeting stipends, the department payroll expenses, comma, or other costs budgeted for the nation's annual comprehensive budget. There's that or. So this is not allowable under Exhibit A for that purposes of trying to put in per diem. I'm sure the Department of Health has the per diem, has travel expenses already in the comprehensive budget. So this is to prevent that, because these are donated dollars. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, is that Vice Chair? Maybe before I go back to Dana, Mel, Mr. Mel Rodas, are you still with us?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I'm here.
Okay,
Vice Chair, thank you for your question. Oh, sorry, sir.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for your question, Vice Chair Smith. I'm looking at the section that you're referring to, C3, and Exhibit A, the Fund Management Plan. And I see what you're saying. I read it slightly differently in terms of the language, other costs budgeted for in the nation's annual comprehensive budget. I don't think that means other cost categories, whereas, travel expenses or per diem, that would be a cost category. But I think it means actual costs that are budgeted for. So if the department that is budgeting for these travel costs, if these are separate travel costs that are totally different than the travel that's being budgeted for through the comprehensive budget, then I think this would be permissible. So if the comprehensive budget is budgeting for travel costs like to conferences, to meetings, and so forth, and these travel costs are being budgeted for, travel to the chapters to distribute the direct aid, or travel to the isolation and alternative care sites, then that would not be what is budgeted for in the comprehensive budget. And that's kind of how I'm seeing it. But maybe we need to actually ask ask Dr. Jim and Dr. Yellman, is that actually the case that these are different travel costs that are not budgeted for in the comprehensive budget? Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair.
Back to Dana. Do you want to add something to it?
Thank you, Chair. I think that Mr. Rodas did a good explanation. I would just sum it up as the way my interpretation of it, which is the way I read it, which is very, very similar to how Mr. Rodas reads it, is that provision that says other costs budgeted for in the nation's annual comprehensive budget. The purpose of that is to make sure that we're not duplicating costs, so that we're not in the comprehensive budget budgeting for travel to a specific chapter for a specific purposes, and then in this donation fund budget, budgeting for the same thing. So I look at it as prohibiting duplicated expenses. Thank you, Chair and Vice Chair, and Mr. Rodas.
Okay, back to Vice Chair Smith. No bueno. So, does that answer your question, Vice Chair?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Rodas, and also Dana. That is very vague, because how are you going to determine whether this budget is for the chapter? Well, we're trying to say this is for the chapters, but in the annual Navajo Nation's comprehensive budget, it doesn't specify what they're using that funding for. They could easily pull that funding out and say, we're using it to provide per diem out of their comprehensive budget annual. Now, it seems like we're duplicating that by layering it and using the people's money that could have been used for the nation on the annual comprehensive budget. They were allocated so many dollars. That's my argument. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Vice Chair Smith. And maybe what I could do is defer to Vice Chair Slater, if you want to provide a response to Vice Chair Smith's argument.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Smith, and thank you very much, Chair, for recognizing me. In regard to the 3000 series and the $44,795, there is no HCOC budget. HCOC had been funded out of the CARES funding. There's no duplication for these purposes because they basically are all just, everyone's on loaner from some other program, but to actually deliver all of the services from the program, they need some funding, and that's where the 3000 series is coming from. It also represents a 0.5% of the whole budget. So this is the 0.5% of the budget.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Vice Chair Slater. Committee members, any more questions on amendment number 2? I'm not hearing anything. So with that, I'll call for the question on amendment 2. Delegate Jimmy Gillhair.
Pablo Green, I understand the budget. Yeah.
Okay, Delegate Jimmy Gillhair votes green. Vice Chair Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I vote red.
Okay, so for the record, Vice Chair Smith votes red. Delegate Amber Knas-Bakrati.
Delegate Amber Knas-Bakrati votes green. Thank you.
Okay, for the record, Delegate Amber Knas-Bakrati votes green. Delegate Nathaniel Brown.
Delegate Brown votes green.
Okay, Delegate Nathaniel Brown votes green. Delegate Elmer P. Begay. Delegate Elmer P. Begay. Okay, with that, for the record, we do have 3 in favor, 1 opposed, Chair not voting, and amendment number 2 passes. Back to the main motion. Committee members, any further questions or comments on the main motion? After that, I'll call for the question on the main motion, legislation 319-20 with 2 amendments. Peggy, if you would give us a second reading on the amendments that were passed by the Budget and Finance Committee.
Amendment 1 to legislation number 0319-20, sponsored by Honorable Crotty. On page 3, line 11, insert new section as follows. Section 4, COVID-19 response donation fund reimbursement. New language, the COVID response donation fund shall be reimbursed for any eligible expenditures as set forth in this legislation from any eligible FEMA reimbursements and or other federal funding, specifically including additional congressional appropriations for COVID-19 related relief made available to the Navajo Nation. And then Amendment 2 to legislation number 0319-20 in Exhibit B, replace the existing budget forms 1, 2, and 4 with the new budget forms. This amendment will replace Exhibit B in its entirety. The NECA and PAE contracts are attached in Exhibit B. 2, add two OMB memos dated January 20th, 2021 as Exhibit C. 3, page 2, line 20, insert new paragraphs F and G as follows. New language F, the Office of Management and Budget OMB has reviewed the budget forms prepared by the Department of Emergency Management and provided 2 memoranda which are attached as Exhibit C. G, notwithstanding the issues noted by OMB, the Budget and Finance Committee is satisfied that the legislation has been drafted to conform with the donation fund management plan at Exhibit A. And those are the 2 amendments to 0319-20.
Thank you for that second reading. With that, Delegate Jimmy Yellowhair on the amendment. On the main motion.
Biga.
Gushin, for the record, Delegate Jimmy Yellowhair votes green. Shanta, Vice Chair Smith.
I vote red.
For the record, Vice Chair Smith votes red. Shanta, Delegate Amber Kinas-Bakadi.
Delegate Amber Kinas-Bakadi votes green. Thank you.
Okay, for the record, Delegate Amber Kinas-Bakadi votes green. Shanta, Delegate Nathaniel Brown.
Delegate Brown votes green.
Okay, Shanta, Delegate Nathaniel Brown votes green. Shanta, Delegate Elmer P. Begay. Delegate Elmer P. Begay. And for the record, we do have a vote tally of 3 in favor, 1 opposed, and Chair not voting. Amendment 319-20 hereby passes. With that, Vice Chair Slater, do you have anything to say?
Thank you very much to the committee and all of the agents for all of your work on behalf of the Navajo people. Yeah.
For bringing this legislation before the committee. With that, let's move on forward to the next item on our agenda. Legislation 0002-2021, sponsored by Shananta. Delegate Eugene So. Eugene So, are you still on the line with us?
Can somebody mute their phone?
Delegate Eugene So, are you still on the line? With that, Peggy, can you read the legislation into the record for us?
Okay, legislation number 0002-21 is a proposed Navajo Nation Council resolution, has gone to Health, Education, and Human Services Committee, and now it's at Budget and Finance Committee. Then it goes on to Resources and Development Committee, and then the NABI Committee, and then to the Navajo Nation Council. And it's 24th Navajo Nation Council, third year, 2021, introduced by Eugene So, prime sponsor, tracking number 0002-21, an act relating to the Health, Education, and Human Services, Budget and Finance, Resources and Development, and Navajo Committees, and Navajo Nation Council, approving supplemental funding from the unreserved undesignated fund balance in the amount of $4 million for the 110 Navajo Nation chapters summer youth employment programs, waiving 12 NNC section 820E, F, and J. I believe that's J. Then you go on to the reference documents that are attached. You have the budget forms, and then you have the Legislative Council's memo. The Internet Public Review has one comment from Titus J. Nez, Pinedale chapter, which is also attached, and then the committee report from the Health, Education, and Human Services Committee. And it has a due pass with no amendment and no directives. And then it has a vote tally sheet that's also attached. Mr. Chair.
That committee members, is there a motion?
This is Delegate Brown. I'll motion.
Okay, Delegate Nathaniel Brown, motion on this legislation, and second by Vice Chair Smith. So there's motion and second. With that, committee members, are there any questions, comments? Hold on, before I do that, Delegate Eugene So, on this legislation to the Budget and Finance Committee.
This legislation comes before us. The reason being is I had a lot of questions, a lot of complaints with regards to when it comes out during the summer. They're saying it's usually always late and the kids don't ever get their money until they're 2 weeks or a month in school to get their checks. Of course, these are college students and also the high school. If everything goes well, hopefully, that everybody's going to get vaccinated. Because last year didn't have a lot of kids working at them. So they were kind of in need of some funds for their school. So so they can have something that they want before going for packing for, so they can pack it to school. Of course, it's just the same old thing that hasn't you undeserved other funds absence lately. I was just looking at it, so that's where it was coming from. But this time, I just wanted to ask for it ahead of time. I see, oh yes, we don't have the funds, or your but what I feel is is they're the future. They're the one that's going to be the leaders. They're going to be the one that's going to be out there. Like me, take my journey another 10, 20 years. So I want to leave something for the kids so they can learn better whatever they need, they have it on hand. When I went to school, I had both shoes were open. I had to put one shoe on top of the other one so not to show it. and I had holes in my knees. So the only clothes that I got was from the Presbyterian or the Catholic Church that my mom brought, or some older brothers gave it to me. But this time and day, we have some funds that we can help them out with, so they don't have to fill in any artwork to their friends out there when they go back to school during the summer to their the fall semester. Another it is even get bad in kids, so it's really up to you guys. Share it all in kids. So that's what I'm doing for my people across the Navajo Nation all time. 110 chapters of 50 go in skate. I don't know it was in the legislation. It's either a yado nido a stand like it says in the bells on the large controller door OMB. That is the whole it was asked for that those two documents. So I'm pretty sure it can be amended into it. You should educate all this. So share for listening. Tanisha can instead Twitch in the able to change Kenya on it as it should what's something that's another. See that I'm right in the middle where the growth is. I don't have running water, I don't have electric light. Because I can't be not kind of town. Now it's getting cold, so I had to heat up my little house. Thank you.
Legislation behind the league. Committee members, are there any questions or comments? I'll call for the question on legislation 0002-21. Shnanta, Delegate Jimmy Yiller here.
Mr. Chair, I have a question, please, real quick.
Okay, go ahead, Peggy.
Chair,
Peggy, go ahead.
Who is the seconding party to this legislation? The motion.
It is Vice Chair Smith.
Okay, thank you. That's all I needed.
Kashina. Shnanta, Delegate Yeller here. How do you vote on the main motion?
I vote green.
Kashina, for the record, Shnanta, Delegate Jimmy Yeller here votes green. Shnanta, Vice Chair Smith.
Vote green.
Shnanta, Vice Chair Smith votes green. Shnanta, Delegate Amber Canaz-Bakrati.
Delegate Amber Canaz-Bakrati votes green. Thank you.
Okay, Shnanta, Delegate Amber Canaz-Bakrati votes green. Shnanta, Delegate Nathaniel Brown.
Delegate Brown votes green.
Okay, Shnanta, Delegate Nathaniel Brown votes green. Shnanta, Delegate Elmer P. Begay. Delegate Elmer P. Begay. So that we have, for the record, vote tally, 4 in favor, 0 opposed. Chair not voting. Legislation 0002-21 does hereby pass Budget and Finance Committee. With that, Shnanta, Delegate Eugene So, pwede na so na banadling to.
Thank you.
Iga hana ada ya tele distis Diego quite a studio. Kashina. With that,
Yes, brother, he's Delegate Yeller. Thank you, Honorable Sir. God bless you, my friend. Kashina.
With that, Shnanta, new business is probably cut. Today, close of session, written announcements and adjournment. Motion to adjourn.
Before I ask for request for adjourn, can I say something before adjourn? Budget and Finance Committee on the legislations for Black Mesa 318 and 314 and 315. From Black Mesa community, say thanks to all of you who vote yes for 313. In the Henio, Neto, Honorable Smith Neto, I don't emergency today on emergency leaving the Brown. It should not full council. She had in heart or assistant co-host. People said thank you very much for your understanding the hardship in the Hard Rock area and Black Mesa and PL area. Area shared teams. I want to say thank you, my colleagues, for your great help. Yeah, one story to the chair. That's my announcement. I adjourn.
The motion to adjourn. Delegate Jimmy Yellen here. Delegate Amber Knazlakati.
I'll second. And can I request, Chair, before we adjourn, could we get a written update from OOC and OMB on the Navajo CARES? We need to get that update. Thank you.
Kushina, with that, there's the motion and second to adjourn. Adlo with the request. Peggy, did you get that request?
So noted.
Kushina, thank you, and reach out to Ms. Perlin Kirk and her staff regarding the update report, and maybe to OMB also too. Kushina, with that, and email them all to us. That we do have a motion and second to adjourn. Committee members, Delegate Jimmy Yellen here. Motion to adjourn.
I'll agree.
Kashin, Ados Vice Chair Smith.
Agree.
Okay, with that, Ados Delegate Amber Knazlakati, a motion to adjourn.
Delegate Amber Knazlakati votes green. Thank you, Chair. Have a good evening.
Okay, thank you. And Ados Delegate Nathaniel Brown.
Delegate Brown votes green. Yeah.
Delegate Elmer PBA. Delegate Elmer PBA. We do have a vote of 4 in favor, 0 opposed. Chair not voting on the motion to adjourn, and we are hereby adjourned at 6:13 p.m. I can't have long committee members for long, good discussion on 2 legislations. And have a good evening. Stay warm and be safe out there. And also, we do have our reminder that we do our schedule for COVID-19 testing tomorrow prior to the winter session that begins Monday morning. So with that, and Peggy and Ramona, to Dana, Mel Rodas at DOJ, and also to our legislative branch staff and OPDP staff, Mr. Paulson Chaco, if you're still on the line, and everybody. Kushina,
the controller. Chair, do you have the call-in number for tomorrow's? Yeah, do you have the call-in number for tomorrow's meeting?
Let me check my email. Once I get, I'll put on the group text. Kushina, thank you to Controller Shimon.
Chair, is that for the PTF meeting? Can you forward me that information too? Okay.
Okay.
And then when are you available to sign the committee report? Sign and lay it. Is that okay? Whenever it's like Monday going, yeah, or tomorrow actually, huh?
Yeah, tomorrow we have to be there to get our COVID testing.
Okay.
So I'll be there about before noon.
Okay, I'll have it ready for Ramona to put in your box.
Chair,
Ramona. I'll check my box tomorrow then, and then if it's there, I'll sign it. But yeah, I'll definitely be in Window Rock tomorrow. Should I jump the yellow here?
Just tomorrow at between 1 and 2, I will get my second shot at the San Marco IHS headquarters.
Tomorrow. I see. That didn't scout. Not
Well, be careful. This new variant, they don't think the vaccine might be that effective, so still be careful, delegate.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you very much, Chair, excuse me, Chair. I wonder, Mr. Carl Slater, Honorable Carl Slater, still on the line. Anyway.
I think shot is way though. Sent out down later. Shot is without. Antes shot is what.
Anyway, what shop for this through you, Chair? From Black Mesa, the people want him to support us at 313 SG Road 8031. Shop for this, no. They send us 80. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We complete our agenda? Thank you, for Chair.
Diga, né? Agustina, da, aqui, ó. Aqui, né?